Thank you very much. So I stand here on a precipice. I'm standing here on a carpet, but I stand here on a precipice between two jobs. So as you'll see, my slides say GradCore, but as Tim's just said, I'm about to start a new role as the chief exec of AGCAS, which I'll start in 2 weeks' time. This is actually my last day at GradCore, so you are my leaving do. So thanks very much, everyone. Where are the beers? That's all I'm asking. But it's really great to be here. I was asked by Monica to end on a positive note. And I kind of feel like actually the whole thing's been pretty positive, to be honest. And the general atmosphere at the moment, I think more broadly feels more positive than perhaps it has for some time. So I think I'm going to try and keep an optimistic tone and try and talk a little bit about some of the work that I've seen go on around the topics of graduate employment, graduate employability, and graduate recruitment and graduate retention within regions and particularly within Yorkshire. And I'm going to attempt out of that to draw a few patterns and maybe draw some kind of lessons from the past and then maybe just set out a few hopes for the future. So try and send us out of the building on a kind of broadly happy note. So I called it Reasons to be Cheerful as a talk. This is the first reason to be cheerful. There we go. Look at Virgil's face. Sad times, Virgil. Anyway, I don't know about you, but I was dancing around my kitchen last night. Anyway, reason number one to be cheerful. Anyway, so as Tim's outlined, this is a bit about my background and going through sort of recruitment in HE and GradCore. But actually, hopefully many of you do know, GradCore's origins lie in a project called Graduates Yorkshire, which was all about connecting graduates and SMEs in Yorkshire, and actually is a spin-out from Yorkshire universities. So on one level, I sit here 18 years later, having started running that project, feeling a bit of a failure, because back we are here talking about this again, and we know we still haven't solved it yet. But actually, it's great to see the appetite for that, if you like, rekindled. I know Yorkshire universities are doing some great work on this. I know many of you individually are doing some great work on this. And again, I'm hoping to end on a positive note today that perhaps this is a time where we can really reset that kind of work around the connection between graduates and place and how Yorkshire in particular can kind of capitalise on the value of graduate talent, help it to grow, create growth, create productivity and enhance the skills base in the region. Just a bit about GradCore, for those who don't know. So GradCore is a social enterprise that works on graduate recruitment and employability with a wide range of universities, employers and government and things like that. And a quick slide here about some of the work we've done with universities and employers. And then in terms of AGCAS, for those of you who don't know who AGCAS is the representative body for all of the career services in the universities in the UK and Ireland. So that's where my new role will be in a couple of weeks' time. So, where have we come from on this kind of journey around regional graduate employment retention? What kind of things have been going on, and what has this looked like over time? So, I thought I'd start by being offensive. Don't be a dick. Well, sorry about the ribald language, but when I first started working on a project that was called Graduates Yorkshire, one of the early adverts I was shown, genuine advert, it wasn't this exact one, I still sadly haven't got a copy of the original. This was the advertising slogan used to discourage graduates from going to London and staying in Yorkshire. I haven't made this up. That was the slogan. So I've done my best to recreate it. But that was genuinely the sort of standard we had of like, this is how we'll keep them here. Things have moved on a little bit, I hope. So by the time we got to 2010, and I took over what was Graduates Yorkshire in 2006, we actually had, we were obviously in those days, you had the regional development agencies as the kind of framework for economic development, particularly in England. And you actually had a remarkable network of regional graduate retention and recruitment initiatives going on. So you had, I don't know how well you can see some of this, but obviously in Yorkshire here, you had Grads East in the east of England, Grads Kent, Grads South West, Unlocking Cornish Potential, Go Wales, Graduate Advantage in the West Midlands. So you had a real range of initiatives, and each of the RDAs had a fairly high level of commitment to the idea of retaining graduates in their region or utilising graduates more effectively. And it was quite positive. But then 2010 came around, and kind of we went like that. And pretty much over the next 2, 3, 4 years from 2010, almost all of those disappeared. The only two that remained were here in Yorkshire, which we still run the Yorkshire Graduates Job Board, and down in Grad Southwest. And the only reason that those two stuck around was because they found a kind of semi-commercial way of running a job board basically and generating a bit of money through that to kind of connect graduates in Yorkshire or graduates in the Southwest with businesses. But there was no funding, there was no money. It was an area that really lost its commitment and lost its energy. And so all of those which were funded initiatives disappeared. So I'll kind of come back to that later on in terms of what can we learn from that in terms of if we start setting things up now or if we launch new initiatives. We heard just now about a West Yorkshire scheme coming up soon, hopefully. How do we look at making those long-term sustainable as well as, priming them potentially with money in the first instance? Now, it's not all been doom and gloom since 2010, although some of you may think that. But we've also had other initiatives in that time as well. And one of the things that came along was the concept of the City Graduate Scheme. With the kind of shift perhaps from regional thinking on economic development, we moved more to city-based thinking around this. The City Grad Scheme idea actually came up with, if you like, here in Sheffield, in our old offices up by the University of Sheffield. And myself and one of my colleagues, John, we were having a bit of a whiteboard session, and we were thinking about this idea of connecting graduates and SMEs. And we came up with this idea of, well, why couldn't you turn a place into a graduate scheme? So take a collective of SMEs, have all of their jobs together, and effectively make that a graduate scheme to compete with PwC or whatever. And we thought, what do we do with this? What do we do with this idea? So we did the logical thing that anyone would do in this situation. We went and pitched it to Scarborough, and Scarborough said no. But then Sheffield said yes. And then RISE was born, and RISE became an amazing partnership between the universities, between the local authority, between the city region, between ourselves and various other private sector partners. And it was a scheme that ran for 8 to 9 years. A number of people in this room were heavily involved in it and successfully placed lots of graduates in SMEs. So it wasn't all bad. And that scheme, that city-based graduate scheme idea has then spawned other ones in Liverpool, Cardiff, Nottingham, and 1 or 2 other places as well. So there have been other activities around this, but it's been perhaps a bit thinner on the ground than that map I showed you, which covered nearly all of, certainly England and Wales, back in 2010. So if that's the kind of history bit and that's the nostalgia trip, where are we going next, and kind of what might we look to for some pointers about what a kind of hopeful future might look like around this idea of like graduates and regions and SMEs and aiming at this kind of inclusive growth and skills and growth kind of future that seems to be the narrative. Well, there's a few things. I think the first thing is that collectively, all of us in this room, and certainly my new role in AGCAS, this is going to be key to my work, need to be out there making the case for graduates and the value of graduates. There's been quite a lot of anti-university and anti-graduate rhetoric that I'm sure many of you will recognise, and that's been motivated by all sorts of different things, but that needs to be pushed back against. We need to make the case for graduates and how they add value. We know, for example, that places with a higher proportion of graduates in the workforce are more productive. We know that SMEs with a higher proportion of graduates in their workforce are more innovative. We know that populations that have more graduates tend to be more civically active, tend to be healthier. There's a ton of benefits to graduates. You wouldn't know that if you generally sort of took in a lot of the sort of general media narrative over the last few years, and certainly some of the political narrative as well. And you can see there the huge contribution universities make to the economy. But also, we know career services play a particularly vital role as well in that, as they support hundreds of thousands of graduates into the labour market every year. And actually what we're seeing is that post-pandemic, the job growth is still greater in roles needing higher level skills. So all of these pointers tell us that there is real value to graduates, even if quite a lot of the time that story is not really being told. So I would say it's incumbent of all of us who are invested in this and see this as important to take that message out to government, to businesses large and small across the UK and beyond. But are we also maybe seeing some social mobility shifts? I hope so. This is a chart I saw a couple of days ago, which shows from the Sutton Trust. And this is the percentage of the current cabinet, or the cabinet over time, that were privately educated. And this is the new cabinet here, down at 4%, which is the best since Clement Attlee's government in 1945. So you can see the huge proportion, and we know that this kind of stuff exists. The Sutton Trust do some great work around this in terms of explaining how so many of the professions still are dominated by privately school educated people. So it's great to see that the Cabinet actually is going to be represented by much more of a state school proportion. And let's see if that starts to signal some positive things around social mobility. The geography of the Cabinet is interesting as well. Again, for those of us in Yorkshire, pretty, again, a bit small perhaps, but again, pretty big cluster around here of where the MPs are based. And also, we know there's a higher proportion now of MPs who have a university in their constituency who are in government now as well. So there's a bit more of a vested interest. And we know universities are under serious pressure financially at the moment. There's a bit more of a vested interest from MPs, I think, and I hope, to make sure that university finances are considered and looked after, and there's some support provided there. And this was a really interesting piece of work I saw just a couple of weeks ago, which was from some US academics. And they were trying to, they studied US payroll data. And they studied there were 4 million graduates in this data survey and 27,000 employees. So it was quite a decent, chunky bit of data. And what they then tried to do was to map various US cities on a 3-point chart. And again, the writing's a bit small, so I'll show you what it says on here. So at the top of the triangle, you have wages. Down here, you have hiring rate, i.e. is there quite a bit of hiring going on of graduates specifically? And then affordability in terms of cost of living and that side of things. And Paul, who was speaking earlier in the session we just had here on devolution, was mentioning 3 very, very similar factors as really being key to attracting and having and retaining graduates in a region. Now, the 4 cities we have here, we have Cleveland, Ohio here, so kind of Rust Belt US here, where we've got low wages, plenty of jobs actually, and actually super affordable. So that's kind of one model. You've got Santa Clara here in California, so kind of LinkedIn headquarters kind of territory, where wages super high, happy days, not very many jobs, definitely not affordable to live. Rochester in New York, where you've got both a low hiring rate and low wages. It's very affordable to live, but there's just no jobs. And then perhaps the one that's the most balanced is this Raleigh here in North Carolina, which has pretty good wages, pretty good hiring rates, and reasonably decent affordability. Now, my question would be, where is your city on that chart? Could we do a similar chart for the cities in Yorkshire? Could we do a similar chart for Yorkshire as a whole compared to the other regions around the UK with a similar kind of tranche of data? And what would it show us? What would it tell us? And what are the things that we can capitalise on here in this kind of model to make Yorkshire a super attractive place for graduates both to come and study and then to stay and work and be productive and help grow the economy? So, conclude by talking about maybe some of the lessons learned and then finally my kind of hopes for the future. So, what are the lessons learned from kind of nearly 20 years of working on this kind of stuff? First is partnership makes the difference. If I look at something like Rise Sheffield, that was a brilliant program for a good period of time. And again, one that ultimately in the end ran out of funding, but actually for its period was fantastic. Partnership was really at the heart of that. That worked because actually the universities sacrificed some of their, if you like, personal, as it were, goals for the greater good of Sheffield in that context, to go, we can make this thing work. And similar partnerships that we've seen in other initiatives, and my entire organisation, GradCorps, sprang out of a partnership founded by all of the career services in Yorkshire in the mid-90s. That was our original origins. So we really believe that partnership can make a difference. So any situations where you work together, and there was a conversation sparking off in the devolution session just there as well about boot camps being linked up around the region and things like that, can really help. Graduates, well utilised, create economic growth and improve SME productivity. Simple. We're probably all signed up to this already. But again, it's about making this argument. And we need to make this argument more consistently to policymakers, to people who might now and soon hold the public purse strings, but to businesses as well. Universities and their career services are key. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I really think they are. As I say, my own kind of organisation I'm about to leave was originally set up by a bunch of career services and universities who were way ahead of their time in thinking about job boards, in thinking about connecting regions and graduates and SMEs. And so universities and career services play a hugely vital role in this ecosystem. Skills doesn't exist as an agenda in isolation. Again, maybe a self-evident point, but actually we all have experienced the difficulties of getting around both the UK as a whole and then Yorkshire in particular in transport terms. And so we've got to work on those things as well. And that, again, came up in the session we just had. And that's an area that we really need to see work hand in glove with skills. I think a key part of all of this, and in all of our thinking, needs to be about social mobility and DEI factors as well. And I think it's a shared mission, and that's the good news, actually. It is a shared mission now, generally, between universities, between employers, and obviously from the individual student and graduate perspective. And hopefully we'll see it as a government priority as well. So if you look at things like the access and participation plans that universities are tasked with delivering on around ensuring that there are equity of opportunities and equity of progression, regardless of the student's background, that's a really positive development and is resulting in a lot of really smart initiatives inside universities to support those students. But equally, if we talk to the employers who are members of the Institute of Student Employers, the large graduate employers in particular, and their number 1 or 2 priority will at the moment almost always be diversity and how they get more diverse hires. There's clearly a middle of the Venn diagram here that we can work on together more closely. We also have common ground, I think, in the region on wages, graduate level jobs and inclusivity as well. And I think that's again, a shared goal we can work together on. And finally, on the kind of perhaps the lessons learned, when we go back to that slightly stark map of 2010 and then afterwards, we need to be thinking about long-term sustainability. So any initiatives we put in place around graduate retention, graduate employment, that side of stuff, how do we build a bit of longevity into it, as well as doing the really good stimulation of it with initial funding? What do we do to make it something that might last and last and last and last? And that's challenging and it's not easy, but I think it's something worth thinking about. So I said I'd try and end on a positive note. What are my hopes for the future? So these are some of hopes I've set out. I don't think, there's some of the things that I will definitely be going off to try and work on a bit with AGCAS. There's some things I've already been working on with GradCorps, and I know GradCorps will continue trying to do. But I'd also maybe ask each of you to think about which one of those on that list could you make a difference in? Which one of those could you go away and really contribute to? So the first one, an interconnected set of city or regional graduate schemes across the country competing with the largest grad recruiters for early talent. So enabling SMEs to compete on a level playing field with corporate graduate recruiters for the best graduate talent, and making that, a parity of esteem pathway for students and graduates as they leave university. We heard earlier the brilliant story from Ethos Farm about international students, and I think there's a great opportunity to flip this story of hiring international students into a positive option for aspirational and internationally facing companies. So rather than a lot of the rhetoric at the moment, which is quite negative about international students in the context of the migration discussions, why do we flip it into an asset and say, actually, if you really want to grow, if you're actually globally ambitious as a company, you're going to need these people, and make that an asset and find models and structures to do that. Let's have a united front amongst higher education sector bodies to positively make the case for the value of HE and graduates along the lines of what I was saying earlier. I'll certainly be trying to do that in my new job, alongside Barry, who's the president of AGCAS as well. But I know it will need a collective effort on that in order to land that with government in a world where the government currently has quite a lot of burning platforms to deal with. A personal one of mine that has been really important in my work over the last few years specifically is about the idea of embedding employability into curriculum. And Esther talked about this really articulately on the panel earlier today that said, basically, if you don't embed employability in curriculum, that's the only way you get to everybody. That is the only way you get to everybody when you're a university. And then we heard the employer panel say, what we want is soft skills and the understanding of those graduate attributes. They weren't described as graduate attributes, but in essence they are. Things like resilience, communication, emotional intelligence. That's what we need from our graduates. So baking that into curriculum is also the fast-track way to better connect to the kind of skills-based hiring that is now how employers are thinking in terms of. So again, you heard earlier from pretty much all the employers saying, we're not that fussed about qualifications, we're not that fussed about subject. That's borne out by ISE data as well, where we see that 65% of employers, of the large grad recruiters as well, don't mind what degree subject you did. And increasingly don't sift and select on basis of things like whether you got a 2-1 or a first or not. They're interested in the skills you can demonstrate in their assessment centres, in their psychometric tests, and in their recruitment processes. So we need to find a way to allow and give space for students, and I know many of the universities in this room are already doing this, but turbocharging that to be in all curriculum so that every student emerges really understanding their skills and attributes. Social mobility, I think on that front, I'd love to see a situation where every time there is a corporate graduate scheme, there's a parallel social mobility support strand sitting underneath it that basically gives coaching and support to students from either underprivileged or diverse backgrounds to navigate those different stages, whether it's an assessment centre or an interview or a psychometric test, many of which can be very confusing, very difficult, and sometimes intimidating. We run a lot of them, so I kind of know that, and we try and make them as little like that as possible, but actually running those parallel coaching programs, we've done one with the local government association, which has been immensely powerful and seen a much higher uptake than in their diverse hiring. So I'd love to see that as a standard in every corporate or SME graduate scheme. And then finally, finishing on Yorkshire, going back to those triangles, how do we create a situation where, or how might we between us create a situation where we sit with one of those really nicely balanced triangles that has robust hiring, good wages, retains its current affordability, and as such then becomes a really fantastic place for graduates to come and study, get a great degree, develop all their skills and attributes, and then go on and have a thriving career. So I'll stop there. I hope that was optimistic enough, and thanks for listening.